Thank you very much. If you're wondering how I'm doing all the work in those 4 or 5 organizations she mentioned, it is that I'm doing the same stuff and giving it to all those different organizations. First, I'm very thankful to the organizers, and I highly appreciate Saud Anwar and Raza and others who took this initiative. Being an academic and as the first speaker, I feel responsible that I must define the terms first. So what I'll do in these 15 minutes is, first I'll try to define or open up some of those issues for you to discuss and debate. Then I'll explain the context, and then I'll come to the trends in South Asia in general and in Pakistan in particular, which are very relevant to what we are discussing today. If we go by the dictionary, the very definition or meaning of the word radical or radicalization is to undergo fundamental change. It is also used in the context of sweeping change. And historically, and in terms of political science, this phrase is often used in the social and political context. But increasingly, it is now being in the context of religious radicalization also. And it is often used, you will find actually this word in the title of many books which talks about Christian right. You'll find this word often used in some of the discourse in India when they talk about insurgents belonging to different religious traditions, especially the Hindu fundamentalists. So there's nothing specific in this phrase about any religious connotation. Then look at some of the works of leading politicians and political scientists, and they use this phrase radicalization or radical in various ways. Rolf Emerson had said, is not every man sometimes a bit radical? Franklin Roosevelt has said, a radical is a man with both feet firmly planted in the air. However, increasingly now, this word and phrase is used in a context which says, what goes on before the bomb goes off, which is very different than what I had mentioned in terms of other meanings of this phrase. Within the academia and within the policy world, there are 2 or 3 definitions. So the first part of my talk is a little boring, but be patient with me. We want to explain the context. Within the academia, this is now defined as something which increases or reinforces extremism in sentiments or in behavior within an individual or within a group. Also, it becomes very critical when we use this definition to religion, because a fundamental change in your political opinions is an acceptable thing that often happens for revolutionaries, for social movements. But when we use the phrase radical in the context of religion, and especially when I use this now in the context of Pakistan and Afghanistan and in that region, the fundamental change there means actually that all of a sudden some reality and some new truth dawns upon you, and you decide that, okay, I want to go into this heaven, but you're not stopping there. You're saying, I want to go to heaven, but I want to take you to the same heaven by hook or by crook. So this whole notion of imposition, this whole notion of forcing your worldview and your belief on others through violence is what I think defines what we are talking about. The context, as I had mentioned, Pakistan, Afghanistan, to some extent, to a lesser degree in Bangladesh and in India. Now let me come to the setting after defining it and after briefly talking about the context. The setting of the stage is very important, because we are talking about Pakistan and Afghanistan, a region which is in the middle of conflict zones. There are various kinds of conflicts: ethnic, religious, political, insurgencies within India, within Pakistan, border disputes. So one setting, one context, or one reference to setting is conflict zones. Second is, to my understanding, very low levels of education. And the third is religious manipulation. So these, I think, other speakers can differ, I think this is the setting which is right in front of us. Now, what are the trends? I'll briefly talk about 5 different trends of radicalization in South Asia, and then very briefly about What causes that radicalization, which is a controversial issue. Let me begin by the first major sign of radicalization, what I call suicide bombing. In Pakistan, the very first suicide bombing attack happened in 2002 in front of Egyptian embassy by someone who was not a Pakistani. There were no such attacks in 2003, 2004. Then there were 6 or 7 attacks in 2005. From 5, it rose next year to 16, 2006. 2007, 61. 2008, 66. 2009, 86. There were no detailed studies of the phenomena, but very recently some excellent papers came out because some of the police officers, and I have a reason to mention this, which I'll explain later, some of the police officers went to the FATA region, federally administered tribal areas, which are really at the center of this debate and this whole notion. They went there and they found out, after going through detailed profiles, whatever limited data or information was available, that about 70% of the suicide bombers come from one tribe, Mahsoods. I have lived in NWFP and close to FATA, and Mahsoods are a very well-known, very respectable tribe, very brave, nothing to say about the whole tribe, but 70% of the suicide bombers coming from one tribe is something very, very insightful. I don't have time to go into details, but it will explain to you that within the federally administered tribal areas, there are about 60 Pashtun tribes and 460 sub-tribes. And we are talking about just one major tribe. This is basically located in South Waziristan, North Waziristan. These are the areas where major military action has been taking place for quite a while. I'll move on to the next point, which I think is also very central. The second trend, which is attacks and bombings on shrines of Sufis. Now, this is a very important point. The reason is, Islam had come to the region, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Bangladesh, this whole South Asian region, through Sufis, the mystics, who never asked anyone about his or her religious identity when you're entering his dargah or his place of abode. The fact that Rahman Baba, the very famous, respectable Pathan poet, Pashtun poet in northwest frontier province, when his shrine right in the heart of Peshawar was bombed, that was something very significant. Same in Bari Imam, another shrine in Rawalpindi, in Islamabad, bombed twice. Again, there are many shrines, and these are only some cases, but this shows a trend. I had a chance to look at some of the, actually study some of the publications of the major militant groups in Pakistan, and there are dime a dozen in Pakistan, similar sounding names from Harkatul Ansar to Harkatul Mujahideen to very similar names, Jaish Muhammad, Lashkar-e-Taiba. Most of them have their websites. When the government bans those websites, they come up immediately with new ones. In fact, I remember after 2001, I was then in Boston, one of the websites of Harkatul Ansar at that time, because I was going on their website for my research purposes, I had received an email then that this website is being blocked, but please wait, you'll find a new address, we will send you one. These religious groups, my study of their pamphlets, their publications is, within the first 2 or 3 pages, and I am saying it with full confidence, within the first 3 pages of a pamphlet of pamphlets from these militant organizations, their publications, within the first 2 or 3 pages, you'll find a reference against Sufis. Because these militants and hardliners know exactly that whatever Sufis or mystics of South Asia stand for, or that tradition, among the Barelvis primarily, among the Shias, among other communities as well, that this is exactly something which goes against the very essence of what religious extremist groups stand for. So the fact that now, in the last 2-3 years, Sufi shrines are being attacked is something very insightful. This was the second trend line. Third is about attacks on minorities. Last year, there was a major attack on Christians in a city